I could have a mansion on a hill. I could lease a villa in Seville, but it wouldn't be as nice as a summer in Ohio with a gay midget named Carl playing Tevye and Porgy. I could wander Paris after dark, take a carriage ride through Central Park, but it wouldn't be as nice as a summer in Ohio, where I'm sharing a room with a former stripper and her snake, Wayne. I could have a satchel full of dollar bills, cures for all the nation's ills, pills to make a lion purr. I could be in line to be the British queen.
Well, there are a lot of people spending summer in Ohio, not necessarily, I mean, some of them against their own will and some of them by choice, I guess. But that is a wonderful Jason Robert Brown song that begins our coverage of the convention today. I want to just begin by saying somebody that I feel sorry for. I mean, besides, like, America. But no, I feel sorry for Frank Bruni. I don't really feel sorry for Frank Bruni, but because I like Frank Bruni and I enjoy his column in the New York Times. I think he's a good writer. He has interesting things to say. But yesterday he broke the cardinal rule of 2016 political coverage, which was he predicted what was going to happen. And so he did this column basically saying that Ted Cruz was going to kind of roll over, that he was going to implicitly, if not explicitly, endorse Donald Trump after all the bad blood between them, all the horrible things that Donald Trump had said about Ted Cruz's wife and his father and about Ted Cruz himself, that Ted Cruz was going to go up there and violate some basic, principle of personal integrity by endorsing Donald Trump. And then that didn't happen. You should never do that. Never do that during this, certainly not during this convention week, and probably not from now until November. Never say you know what's going to happen over the next 24 hours, except that. And here's my idea for like Nate Silver in 538. The one thing that you do know is that in the next 24 hours, something really weird and unprecedented is going to happen. You just don't know what it is. But see, if I were Nate Silver, I would just tweet that every day. There's an 89% chance that something really weird and unprecedented will happen in the presidential campaign in the next 24 hours. And he'd never be wrong. I mean, name me a day where that wasn't the case, going back to, say, last November. It's always true. So just don't get specific. That's the key. And also never stop looking at your computer monitor and or your television screen, because just things happen all the time. I was like, I turned away for 30 minutes today, and Ted Cruz announced that he was not Donald Trump's servile little puppy. I don't want 30 minutes to go by without my knowing that. I want to know right away that Ted Cruz is explicitly not going to be Donald Trump's servile little puppy. And by the way, I think we know now what Ted Cruz's safe word is. All right, so we're going to talk very specifically and a little bit more seriously about some of the things that have happened at the Republican National Convention. And towards the end of the show, too, I know you probably have your own pent-up perceptions. We're going to try to leave some time, more time than we usually leave, because we're pretty terrible about it most of the time. We're going to try to leave some time for you to call in. But that is still to come. Right now, we're going to talk to David Swerdlick, assistant editor at the Washington Post Opinions, Outlook, and Post Everything. And first of all, welcome back to our show.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Colin. Thanks for having me.
So, not to do a protracted autopsy on this Ted Cruz thing, but it's still a bit of a mystery to me. I mean, usually they don't let you out on stage if they don't know what you're going to do. I mean, that's just sort of a fundamental precept of convention management, especially if there's been bad blood between the two of you. I mean, does anybody know? I mean, I guess, Cruz did say that he told the Trump people he wasn't going to endorse.
Yeah, and here's the thing, Colin, I think this works on two tracks. There's the Ted Cruz specific track, which is this. Look, he sort of brokered with the campaign this idea, and I don't have all the reporting, but he worked on this idea that, look, I'm not going to endorse, but I'm going to come speak, and there was, some sort of, so détente worked out. But as you said, you got to know what's happening in those last 24 hours. 2 days ago, he had the welcome event off-site in Cleveland, but off-site for his supporters to, quote-unquote, thank his supporters. Last night he gave the speech that people are now hashtagging the Ted wedding, obvious Game of Thrones reference. And then today he gave a fiery speech to the Texas delegation explaining why he didn't endorse. I was in the hall last night, in the Quicken Loans Arena last night, in the press area, and at the point when Cruz turned and walked away from the podium and it was 100% clear that he wasn't endorsing, that huge boo went up, and it was like this moment where, as you were pointing out, you just can't predict it. But the other track, Colin, that I think this is on is the Trump track, which is this. He's never run for office before, and his team and his family have not seen all the twists and turns in the road. You learn to run for president when you run for senator or governor. You learn to run for senator or governor when you run for city council or state legislature. If you've never run for office before, you cannot see all these twists and turns in the road coming at you. And I think that's happened to the Trump campaign a couple of times this week. Ted Wedding, the Melania Trump plagiarism of Michelle Obama. It's been look, Trump will survive. Trump will come out of the convention and regroup, but it's been not a great week for them.
I mean, I think there's a third track. There's a way that we can think about this that, I just want to back up and say, in general, when these things happen, they do hurt candidates. They have hurt campaigns in the past. Miscalculations, particularly maybe being too aggressive in the denunciation of your opponent. I think about the Ann Richards nomination speech in 1988 where she just crucified George H.W. Bush. She did that poor George speech. And I actually thought it worked against her interest and in favor of George H.W. Bush. But one thing about Donald Trump is, one of the things that he is familiar with, I mean, you correctly say he's not really that familiar with campaigns, but he's very familiar with the World Wrestling Federation, or whatever it's, WWE, where there's heroes and there's villains and there's spectacle and there's plot. There's a lot of plot. And it doesn't even matter that much from week to week whether Vince McMahon is a hero or a villain or any of the wrestlers are heroes or villains, as long as you've got a lot of them and a lot going on. And this convention has a little bit of the look and feel of that, David.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Colin. I agree with you, by the way, about Ann Richards, the silver foot in the mouth comment. That redounded more to the benefit of Bush, ultimately. You're totally right about that. Trump, he's been in the public eye for 40 years, so he does know how to play this game on a certain level. And I think your observation is correct that some villains and some maybe anti-heroes have emerged in this convention. But I do strongly think that one thing that I don't know this for sure, but I think one thing that may have been overlooked by Team Trump is, look, they dispatched handily 17 candidates. But Cruz was the one guy who hung in there till the very end, who was the only guy who kind of laid a glove on Trump, won several states, outmaneuvered him in some delegate contests after the fact. So, yes, maybe the other 16 candidates were pushovers, but I'm not sure why they would have, if they did, expect Cruz to be a pushover. Cruz is the guy who came into this, who beat David Dewhurst in Texas, the multi-millionaire lieutenant governor of Texas, who no one thought Cruz could beat. Cruz beat him in the Texas Republican primary for Senate in 2012. Then Cruz came into the Senate, bucked his own leadership immediately, and basically said, if senators won't go with me, I will get my support on the other side of the hill from the House, and we will try a government shutdown. His first year as a backbencher freshman senator. So why would people think that now he would play go along to get along? I don't know.
You know, David, one of the other mysteries of this campaign and of this political season has been the way the Republicans didn't really seem to embrace the lesson that they've said, really after the last two cycles, that they had learned, which is that they have to have a bigger tent, be more open, more diverse, that the demographics of voting in the United States are changing. If you couldn't think of a better reason to change than that, then that's a really good reason, that you have to reach more people. And this campaign hasn't really seemed to work this way. But then the convention, which usually, maybe the fact that it's a little bit early this year, they didn't have as much time to prepare, but this is your chance to script things out and to get the message out much more clearly, the message that you really want, as opposed to people going off script and stumbling over the course of a campaign. But you've got things like, U.S. Congressman Stephen King going on the Chris Hayes show and saying that non-whites haven't contributed meaningfully to civilization. I mean, that's not part of the scripted part of the convention, but it's the kind of outlier that you really want to control and maybe repudiate. You've got a platform that seems aggressively non-inclusive. It's certainly if there's a log cabin Republican who can look at that thing without throwing up, I can't imagine who that person is. It just seems like that was the thing that they needed to do, and they're not doing it.
No, that's right, Colin. After 2012, as your listeners know, there was the much talked about, much vaunted Republican RNC quote-unquote autopsy report, where the main takeaways were the Republican Party has to be more inclusive and reach out to the LGBT community, or at least become less antithetical to the interests of the LGBT community, broaden the tent to include Black and Latino and Asian American voters, and to reach out to millennials. I would say, and I think most people would say, that not only have they not executed on that from 2012 till now, in recent months they've been regressing and going backwards, and they're in a worse position on that front. There are Black conservatives here and Latino conservatives here. I've actually spent some time with conservatives of color in Cleveland the last couple of days. People, I think, have sort of we're just going to have to live through this. We're just going to have to, get through to the other side. There's a dispiritedness in general to a degree in Cleveland, and that includes conservatives of color. The other thing that I would say on this is that the Trump campaign, again, to me, this is the clearest cut of all, Colin. They are missing the low-hanging fruit. Last weekend in Cincinnati, the NAACP convened, and Donald Trump was invited to speak at the NAACP convention, and he declined. Look, he is polling at 0% in last week's Marist poll in Pennsylvania and in Ohio among Black voters. 0%. Now, his campaign knows that he's not going to get the majority of Black voters. His campaign knows they're not going to get 15% of Black voters. But if you want your percentage of Black voters in the Marist poll, and granted it's within the margin of error, to go from 0 to 1%, you've got to show up at the NAACP. That's low-hanging fruit, because you go to the convention and you say, look, I know that I'm not going to win the majority of the Black vote, but if I'm elected president, I'm going to be the president of everybody. I'm going to be the president of both the people that supported me and the people that didn't support me. You spend an hour in Cincinnati with the NAACP, maybe people are receptive, maybe you're not, but that's how you demonstrate to the country broadly that you're a leader. If you can't do that, then all of Trump's pronouncements that the Blacks like him, the Hispanics like him, the women like him, the quote-unquote, the poorly educated like him, it rings hollow.
Right, and it is, I remember in 1992 in Houston seeing Condoleezza Rice for the first time. I think she was brought in from Stanford at that point to speak. And I thought, wow, there's a very telegenic, articulate, kind of cool-looking person, who could be really the embodiment of maybe a new Republican message about who they are. This time we've got, like, David Clark, the scariest sheriff. I mean, he just like a Batman villain, Wisconsin sheriff, and another speaker, two speakers kind of putting down Black Lives Matter, which seems to play very well with the people in the funny hats sitting out there in the audience. But once again, you wonder whether it's just losing them votes as opposed to even breaking even.
No, I think it is. Look, people can disagree on issues. They can disagree about foreign policy, about health care, about the size and role of government. But voters are also going to vote. In fact, maybe first they're going to vote on whether they feel like a candidate sincerely has their interests and concerns at heart, and whether a candidate respects them. And when a campaign and its surrogates, including its surrogates of color, kind of give this condescending, down-talking message that you just described, it sort of closes a door to otherwise messaging to communities of color. Here's the irony thing about the Black Lives Matter criticism coming from Sheriff Clark, coming from some others. In that speech that Trump gave last week that everyone talked about, the speech where he declared himself the law and order candidate, a quote that didn't get as much play, Colin, was later on, it was just days after the Dallas police massacre. It was days after Philando Castile in Minnesota, days after Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge. Trump said, I'm reading a direct quote, if he's elected, quote, everyone will be protected equally and treated justly without prejudice, unquote. Well, guess what, Donald Trump? That is all that Black Lives Matter's top line ask is. Of course, Black Lives Matter has ties to, left-wing movements, and there's different factions in different cities, but their top line ask from coast to coast is that everyone will be protected equally and treated justly without prejudice. But Trump has not, he's at moments said things like that, but made no effort to follow up on it, to capitalize on it, or to make people feel like he's sincere about it. And that if he winds up losing this race, look, he could win, but if he winds up losing this race, those will be lost opportunities that were, shouldn't have been lost.
David Swerdlick, so great to talk to you once again, assistant editor at the Washington Post. Opinions, Outlook, and Post Everything. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
All right, we're going to take a break here. As we go into the break, I'm going to tell you that our musical selection here is from Third Eye Blind, who also created some news this week by essentially musically trolling one of the parties at the convention. This did not get Third Eye Blind off John Dankosky's no-fly list, but maybe it helped them a little bit. By the way, and write in to tell us if you like this idea, whether you would support this idea. But Tucker Ives and I have this idea that we'd like to launch a podcast that would be hosted by John Dankosky that would just be called Songs I Hate. And we would play Third Eye Blind, They Might Be Giants, Bare Naked Ladies, the Goo Goo Dolls, Matchbox 20, Maroon 5, Fahrenheit 451, any group with a number in its name probably. And he would just, with each one, explain why he hated them, and maybe even how much he hated them relative to how much he hated the other ones. I feel like that could take off. All right, so email me if you would support such a podcast, colin@wnpr.org. Well, we wanted to, that was a little doomy-gloomy, that first segment, but we wanted to also talk to somebody, a Republican who's out there and who's partaking of all the things that you can partake in when you go to a convention. So Themis Klarides, Republican Minority Leader at the Connecticut House of Representatives and a delegate at the Republican National Convention and a member of the Platform Committee, is joining us now. Welcome back to our airwaves, Themis Klarides.
Hi, Colin. How are you?
We're just fine. And I know you got out there late because of a family issue, and I hope your dad is doing better, and we certainly send him our best wishes.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I arrived very early this morning, so I'm looking forward to the day.
So, you've walked a complicated line here in Connecticut. Connecticut's politics and Connecticut's Republican politics are probably a little bit different than the baseline politics that you're going to be seeing over the next couple of days out in Cleveland or that you've been watching on television. And I know even in previous iterations of the Platform Committee, you've got a different view of, say, LGBTQ rights and issues from what's in the platform. So how are you dealing with it? Or does it just not matter? I mean, for some people will say, well, when I get back to Connecticut, who cares? Nobody knows what's on the platform anyway.
Well, you had mentioned earlier that I was on the Platform Committee this convention, but I was not. It was the last convention. Yeah. I don't know if I would have been able to handle sitting there for this one. Listen, this is how I feel about it. There are plenty of things both of our parties believe in that we don't necessarily, whether you be a Democrat or Republican. I almost feel as if these platforms have become almost obsolete because we only focus on them when we're doing a convention. Mm-hmm. And then we all go home to our various states, and every state has a different iteration of what that platform means or what their definition of a Connecticut Republican or an Idaho Republican or a Florida Republican and so on is. I certainly don't agree with many of the parts of that, of our platform. Usually it's social issues we disagree on. It concerns me, but I also understand sitting on the Platform Committee 4 years ago, you sit in this room, and even though you come from a state like Connecticut where a Connecticut Republican or a Northeastern Republican, for that matter, is much more moderate on social issues, it's a little bit of a slap in the face when you hear the conversations in the rest of the room.
One of the things that's going to be different for you this year is even just the composition of the Connecticut delegation. Obviously, Donald Trump won the state, so that may mean, somebody like you, a longtime Connecticut elected official, will be in the delegation. But also, there's probably a lot of people in the delegation that you haven't met before, or maybe didn't meet until the last 2 or 3 weeks. So, who's out there this time?
Well, there are a handful of legislators. There's, of course, John Fry, who's our national committee man and state representative. There's several of my House Republican caucus, Rosa Rabindis, Tony D'Amelio, Kara Pavlock, and then Senator McLaughlin. And so that's interesting. And then there are people, as you said, that are from different areas, not just politics. And I think that that's a good thing. I think it's nice that we can mix things up and have people from different walks of life, people that are very involved politically, and then people that aren't so involved politically.
Do you think it'll make for a different campaign in Connecticut? I mean, I don't know what the numbers tell you about Trump winning the state. I don't know what the numbers say about down-ticket races. I noticed that Ted Cruz was very concerned about down-ticket races last night in his speech. But obviously, you guys have to run a campaign in Connecticut. Some of it will be based on some of the language and imagery that comes out of this convention. Some of it, as you say, will be very specific to Connecticut. But how do you think what you're seeing this week will affect what you do in Connecticut?
Well, I don't think it affects what we do in Connecticut very much, and here's why. The way we define ourselves in Connecticut as Connecticut Republicans is different than different parts of the state. Sometimes it's similar, sometimes it's not. So we run on our record. I don't have to say I believe a Connecticut Republican is a big tent party, because it actually is, because of the way we voted, because of the way that we've the comments we made. I don't have to say a Connecticut Republican is understanding of everybody's lifestyle and believes that we accept everybody, because we've shown that. That's our voting record. So we're going to run a campaign based on two things, really. The fact that Governor Malloy's record is abysmal, and the Democrats in the House and the Senate have not told him no. I mean, we look at. I have to hear House and Senate Democrats oftentimes criticize the governor and say, he's bad in this regard, or we don't like what he did in that regard, yet they don't stop him. This isn't a dictatorship. We have full branches of government, and the governor, although how much he would like to do it, can't do almost anything without the House and Senate going along. And the 1 or 2 times they've said no, it hasn't been the important time. And so that's how we're running a campaign. We're running a campaign based on our record, based on our principles, based on our policy. We're running a record saying not only have we said we don't like what you're doing, but we've given you example after example after example, budget after budget after budget, as to how we would do it. And that's how we run a campaign. This week is nice and it's interesting and it's fun, but we don't take back everything they say wrote, because that's not how we operate.
You just got out there and you've been through some stuff at home and you're tired. I don't know whether you're going to want to go to any of the fabulous parties that take place at conventions, but conventions can be fun. And with Paul Manafort as the campaign manager and Justin Clark as deputy political director, Connecticut people can probably get into a lot of that kind of stuff. But on a more substantive level, what do you want to do out there? You're only out there for 2 days. Do you want FaceTime with certain national officials? Do you want to spend some time with the Connecticut delegation figuring out what's going to happen over the next 2 years? Do you want to set yourself up for a gubernatorial run 2 years from now? What's on your mind while you're out in Cleveland, Themis Claridis?
Well, since I'm only out here until tomorrow, what I will do is certainly spend time with my delegation. We have an early dinner planned in a few hours at the Botanical Gardens, and then we'll head over to the convention. And then, we'll do interviews with some people from in-state, some people from out of state. I'll talk to some national people. And I'll just, I'm here to enjoy what's going on and learn what I can learn and meet people and be part of this great team we have in Connecticut.
Are you planning to run for governor in 2018?
I'm House Republican leader, and my one and only goal right now is to get a majority in the House this November.
All right. We're going to have scientists analyze the laugh you did when I asked you that. I think we can actually learn. See, there's another laugh. All right, Themis, I'm going to let you go because I know you got a lot on your plate there. Thanks for making time for us today.
Thank you, Colin, as always.
All right. So we're also going to talk to a reporter who's also boots on the ground there, somebody that we're lucky enough to have through John Dankosky, although we might have just lost her because we played the Third Eye Blind song. But joining us now from WBUR is reporter Shannon Dooling, who has been reporting from out in Cleveland. She's joining us through the miracle of Skype. Hello, Shannon Dooling.
Hi, Colin.
So one question I wanted to ask you, I know as this campaign has unfolded, you, like me, have been at actual Trump rallies. I think you've been to more of them than I have. I've only been to one. So those are rallies where anybody can show up. You don't need delegate credentials. You don't need anything. You just need to walk in and make a lot of noise. How does what's happening there at the Quicken Loan Center resemble or not resemble what you saw on the campaign trail heading to Cleveland?
Yeah, great question. So one rally in Nashua, New Hampshire kind of stands out in my mind. It kind of felt to me like this combination of sort of equal parts reality TV, part game show, part stand-up comic shtick, and everyone was just sort of eagerly waiting for Trump to take the stage, and he was cracking jokes, and the crowd was just really engaged and they loved it. And it was kind of like waiting for a rock concert to begin. And so that sentiment, that feeling in the air, that excitement is definitely tangible here. There's a bit more of an agenda here, a bit more of a schedule. But within that schedule, there's certainly, as we've seen every night, there's certainly plenty of room for sort of real-time chaos and sort of gaffes to be taking place. But it's a lot of the same sort of, folks that you might expect at some of those rallies. So definitely some similarities, and I think the structure, albeit a sort of fluid and flexible structure, is a little more tangible than at the rallies throughout the primary.
Yeah, I think is this your first national political convention?
I should say it is, yeah, and it seems I picked a good one to start covering.
It's not a one by which you could necessarily judge any others that you will ever go to. One thing that I can say is, having covered a lot of them, is I think one way that this would strike me as different, were I there, is what you're talking about right now, which is that typically there's sort of a permanent political government in each party, so that the state delegations year to year, they don't vary that much. I mean, they vary to the extent that, say, if McCain wins a state, or Romney wins a state, or Bush wins a state, obviously the people who control that campaign can kind of seat a lot of the delegates and decide who's going. But this has been really different because, a lot of the people that I'm watching on television, the people out on the floor, and what I've read about the coverage too, suggests that the people out on the floor, they were just sort of people who were, dog groomers one day, and then Trump supporters, and then got a call saying, come to Cleveland, you're a delegate. So they're as new to this as you are.
A lot of first-time convention goers, a lot of first-time delegates. I've been talking to a lot of New England delegates, and I've been hearing that sort of sentiment over and over again. This is so much fun. It's way more exciting than I may have expected. I should say one moment that sort of epitomized that to me was, while I was on the floor earlier this week when Willie Robertson, one of the stars of the reality TV show Duck Dynasty, took to the podium. And the delegate I was interviewing, she literally stopped mid-sentence and turned to take a picture of the stage of Willie Robertson as he took the stage. And she was just giddy. She just was so excited. And that to me was a moment where I realized that the Trump campaign really knows what makes its supporters tick. A lot of political observers have been commenting on the absence of former presidents, big name Republicans, kind of missing from the speaking schedule. But in some ways, Trump knows what his most ardent supporters want to hear, and he's certainly been giving a lot of that to them here in Cleveland.
Although, that points up a confusing issue, which is, you may have heard a little bit of the interview I did with Themis Claridis. She's a very prominent Connecticut Republican, and she's one of the more sort of typical delegates that's there in the Connecticut delegation. And I'm sure as you, Shannon, look at these other New England delegations, you probably see a few of those, people who would be at almost any convention. And New England Republicans tend to be a little bit different from some of the Republicans in other places. And on the other hand, probably the bulk of these delegations are hand-picked Trump delegates. They're not necessarily freaking out over the platform, I would assume. Or, it's a little unsettling to watch a convention where the crowd is chanting, lock her up, talking about imprisoning your actual political opposition. But I'm assuming this plays pretty well with the kind of people who've wound up in these New England delegations.
Yeah, it seems to be. It's this weird mix of, in terms of the speaking agenda and sort of the flavor that each of these nights has taken on. There are actors. There are, the UFC executive who took this to the stage earlier this week. Members of Trump's family as children. They're all speaking, and then you have sprinkled throughout. You have Newt Gingrich, Paul Ryan, of course, Ted Cruz making a splash last night. So it's sort of been this fusion of fantasy and reality in some ways. So very much made for TV. So for his sort of core base, those folks that are craving that kind of reality TV sort of production style convention, sort of, like I said, sprinkled in with these sort of these more establishment style voices.
I can tell you from experience that as the week goes on and you're more sleep deprived, your ability to distinguish fantasy from reality will actually deteriorate substantially. However it seems now, it's prepared for it to be fully blurred tomorrow. So I guess the other question that sort of, would be rippling through the people that you're talking to right now is this some kind of turning point? Will there in 4 years be another convention like this one, or will the party find some way to revert and go back to a more recognizable form of itself? Are we seeing history in the making in the sense that there's this fundamental change that can never be unmade, or is this a blip, an anomaly?
I think that very much depends on who you're speaking with. There's certainly, regardless, there's certainly just a palpable feeling that something historic is happening right now. Of course, regardless of the outcome come November, this convention, this candidate, this Republican Party is really unprecedented, and it's fascinating to watch this all play out. But I think that'll in some ways be dictated by the outcome in November. I think that's to be determined. I'm sure some of the sort of more moderate kind of traditional sort of Yankee Republicans are here in the name of unity, in the name of party unity. I caught up with former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown yesterday, and he said, it's all about the future of the Republican Party for me now. And I've heard that from a lot of folks who maybe aren't necessarily, riding the Trump train at this point, but they're here and they're trying to take back the White House. And that resounding sort of no more, we don't want 4 more years of Barack Obama with Hillary Clinton. So if the party can unite around anything, it's just the spirit of getting a Republican back in the White House, it seems, at this point.
All right, Shannon Dooling from WBUR. Great to talk to you. Get a minimum of 4 hours of sleep and eat crudités. Like, make sure you eat vegetables. That's what I learned.
We're working on it. Thanks for having me, Colin.
I learned that the hard way in 1980. All right. So, boy, I just sounded old when I said that. All right. So we're going to just open the phones here in the final segment, whether you're a Trumpling or an anti-Trumpling. I just made up that word, Trumpling. I kind of like it. It's like a dumpling. Anyway, if you're watching the convention and having very profound reactions to it, I'll set up some questions, some basic questions when we come back. But you probably have your own things you want to say, and it would be nice if you could get them off your chest. Stop yelling them at the TV screen. Yell them at the radio instead. 860-275-7266. You can call right now and get on the board, get to the head of the line. 860-275-7266.
The big one and see what happened. We give them money, but are they grateful? No, they're spiteful and they're hateful. They don't respect us, so let's surprise them. We'll drop the big one and pulverize them. The age is crowded, Europe's too old.
All right, it's time to say some thank yous. Betsy Kaplan produced this here show today, and I think Leah Myers, our great intern, is on the phones. By the way, the phones are 860-275-7266, 860-275-7266. You can also tweet at our great tweet master, Greg Hill, at WNPR Colin. Jonathan McPants is on the board right now, and the part of Bill Curry was played by Kid Rock. Did I miss anybody? I think that's everybody. All right, so tomorrow on the show, let me just quickly, I've probably made a huge mistake with tomorrow's show, one that I will wind up deeply regretting in one way or another. But what we did, we have this Friday panel. It's called The Nose. It's a cultural roundtable. 3 people who are good talkers with interesting ideas. They're funny, they're entertaining, they're charming. We have them come in. We pick some topics to talk about. So with the new Ghostbusters movie out, the Ghostbusters reboot, we decided what we would do would be we would invite all the people who are regularly on the nose who do not have Y chromosomes, right? So we just had all the women, and so it turned out 8 of them. 8 of them could fit it into their busy lives to go see the Ghostbusters movie and then come in and talk about it. So we're going to do that tomorrow. I don't really know. Well, I sort of have a plan for how to get 8 different voices on the air, but I don't know if it'll work. And we won't only talk about the Ghostbusters movie, although there's been quite a bit going on with the way that Leslie Jones has been treated on Twitter. There's some side stories that will flesh things out, but we probably will also talk about 1 or 2 other topics, but they'll all be related to double X, basically. Double X chromosomes, I mean. So anyway, that's the plan for tomorrow. Right now, the plan is for you to call in, 860-275-7266, 860-275-7266. And you may also tweet at us, at WNPR Colin. And I'll just put out one idea, and I'm sure some others will come up. One thing that I've been thinking about, I am a little chilled by these lock her up chants. They started on Monday night. They've kept going. And I mean, basically, this is kind of not the American way where you want to imprison the political opposition. There are lots of countries where that does happen, but it's sort of not how you anchor your campaign, with the idea that rather than going through all those tedious and messy debates and, then letting people vote, you just lock up the person that you're running against. And then it's kind of accelerated beyond that, where, in fact, a supporter of Donald Trump, a guy who I might add spoke at the Hartford Trump rally. He's he's from New Hampshire. He's a Trump delegate. He's also, I think, the co-chair of the advisory committee to the Trump Campaign on Veterans Affairs. He, in a radio interview, said that he thought that Hillary Clinton should be put in a firing squad line and shot. And I mean, and the Trump campaign, their response to this was priceless. They said that they are incredibly grateful for his support, but they disagree with that comment, which somehow or other feels less than a wholesale repudiation. And one of the things that I was trying to get at, or in the first segment too, is sometimes when you go too negative on your opponent, like suggesting you should be able to imprison them or shoot them, which is kind of unprecedented here. But even the Ann Richards speech, where she said, "Poor George, he was born with a silver foot in his mouth," and I think she might have been the first person ever to use that line about being born on second base and having thought he'd hit a double. But it backfired, and it didn't help them. It helped George H.W. Bush. And ordinarily, there's a poll bounce that you get out of your convention. Your poll numbers go up the following week. And I'm wondering with this convention whether that's going to happen. Usually you have this incredible chance to make your case and to put together the most scripted and theatrically pleasant version of yourself that you can. And I wonder whether the Trump poll numbers go up, but we'll see. Let's see. Let's go to, in Woodstock, John. Hi, John. You're on the air.
Hey, Colin. How are you?
Oh, I'm reasonably okay. Thanks for caring.
That's great. So something I posted on Facebook, of all places, the other day was, I wish that I have a lot of folks that are friends of mine, folks that I ran against, and folks that are parents of kids that are friends of my kids who are Republicans in my town. It's a largely Republican town, and I would really like them to kind of stand up and kind of say, hey, we're not affiliated with the kind of rhetoric, the kind of platform that's coming out of the Republican Party right now. And I feel like there's a real fear among them. I don't know what it means anymore to be a Republican for them, and I'm not even sure. I think you could say the same thing of Democrats after the Sanders campaign. And I really wonder what is in people's minds when they join a political party and they decide to stay in a political party at this point, because it does feel like something different is happening. And whether we have a third party option or not, I'm just curious as to, what is going through people's minds at this point.
I think it's a great question, first of all. And what I will say about this is, I have a better Republican friend these days. I've had lots of Republican friends in the past. This is not my first, but I'm probably closer to a Republican person right now than I've been in a long time and maybe ever. And I have had a chance to see what his thinking has been like. And it's been very hard. It's been a very difficult process. This is not something, I'm not going to say who this is, but the Trump candidacy isn't something that he's particularly comfortable with. And he's not even comfortable watching other people he knows who are Republicans who are at least pretending to embrace some of this. And I think it's hard. I think, you're rarely going to be a perfect fit with whatever party you choose. There are always going to be some places where you diverge or you're not too crazy about the standard bearer. But this is unusual, and it's hard. And I think it's hard for New England Republicans, and it may be hard for New England Democrats come next week. I think for the people who wind up being players in this world, either as elected officials or the kind of people who hold important backroom positions, one of the things that they have to think about is, how can I in fact influence anything? How can I be a player? How can I have any impact on my party? And by staying home, you don't, right? Ultimately, you have to make a decision. Like, maybe I'm not too crazy about all this Trump stuff, but if I don't go, and if I don't play, if I don't take a job, if I don't get on a committee, if I don't run for office, I can't have any impact whatsoever, including on some of the issues that I do care about. So, I think that affects it. I think it materially affects how people approach those questions. But those are really good questions, John, and thanks for calling. Here's Kara in Stamford. Hi, Kara.
Hi, I'm Karen, but that's okay.
Awesome.
I'm on the Parkway. I'm really sorry to speaking, but when you asked that question about what it is that I'm thinking when I'm watching the Republican convention, I feel like I'm back watching a brown shirt. I have never in my life, and I am older than you are, seen a convention where people are demanding to jail the opponent, the person who's going to be running for the other party. It feels like Greece. It feels like somewhere else, but it's not the country that I know. I don't know. I can't condone it. It upsets me terribly, and I want them to stop and really think about what they're doing.
Yeah, I think the thinking will come later. I'm going to pop you on hold because your phone is a little hard to hear. But yeah, actually there was a Republican commentator on MSNBC, and I feel like there are all these Republican strategists who are kind of named Stephen Schmidt. I think that might be his name, but there's like a Stuart Stevens, and I don't know. There's a lot of them. I can't tell them apart. I'm going to say it was Stephen Schmidt who called this, now he's a Republican, mind you, banana republicanism, which I thought was about right. I mean, this is the kind of behavior you associate with a much less stable form of government where, in fact, you can, what that's called when you lock up the person from the other party who poses the greatest threat to you, that's called having a political prisoner, and then you get kind of involved with Amnesty International and stuff like that. So, yeah, it is a little weird listening to those chants. All right, here's Ted in Quag, New York. I don't know. Ted, where are you calling from? Oh, well, you know what? He's not calling at all, so it doesn't matter. I was looking forward to learning how to pronounce the name of the place that he's from. Here's Jay in Manchester, an easier place to pronounce.
Hi. I wanted to say that the best thing about this convention was that both sides seems to learn from 1968, and we didn't have a riot or violence from either the police force or very much from the demonstrators. And I was afraid we were headed for that. And the other wish I have is that next.
Sorry. I just moved the cursor in the wrong way. I'm very sorry. That was my fault. I knocked him off the line there. So, but let me just say something about that. Yeah, I think, in fact, that's been a good thing, that maybe some of the extremities and some of the extreme behavior inside the convention hall has, I don't know, maybe it drained some of the energy out of the streets because, I think a lot of people were worried going in here. If you think about what you were worried about a week ago, and it did involve open carry laws and the notion that people might be showing up there with actual firearms out in the streets and that there would be clashes. And so far as I can tell, unless I've missed something, there's been a number close to zero of that. And that's a very gratifying fact. So, as much as we might be somewhat concerned by some of the things we're hearing inside the hall, there's good news outside. Nobody's getting hurt. Sometimes that's the most that you can hope for. Here's David in Chester. Hi, David.
Yes, I have a theory, probably wrong, and I believe in the two-party system. I'm an old man. I go way back to Landon and then Wilkie, fine Republicans, I felt, opposing Roosevelt. Now, what's happened here is that when Barack Obama was elected, one of the most powerful men in the Senate, that fellow from Kentucky, said that our first priority is to make this a one-term president. He might have said our first priority is to govern the country, and our second priority is that. But he didn't say that. Mm-hmm. And following that first priority, the Republicans have blocked everything that could be blocked. And we have 7.5 years of nothing. And cleverly, they have blamed this on Barack Obama. And because there seems to be nothing happened, forgive me here, this monster arises who is going to destroy the Republican Party. And that's my idea of the history of what's going on and how this party, I hope, will be reconstituted after whether Trump is elected or defeated. That's my thought.
All right. Thanks very much for your call, David. Yeah, and just, to that point of obstructionism, and I think it was Mitch McConnell, right, who said that the first time, that their primary goal was to make Barack Obama a one-term president. That turned out not to work out very well. And, we're still sitting there. I was scrolling through a site today that told me what day it was in the Merrick Garland nomination process. And, he's the guy who's been sort of sitting there on the back burner as a potential Supreme Court nominee that for some reason or other they won't consider. Well, we know why they won't consider. But to David's point that the Republican Party will be reconstituted after this, I think I'm going to follow the Frank Bruni rule, the rule I made for Frank Bruni at the beginning of this, to say nobody has any idea what's going to happen after this. First of all, it's all utterly conditional on whether Trump wins or loses. That's number one. Number two, even if we knew what the outcome was going to be, even if we knew which one this was going to be, we wouldn't know everything that was going to happen. We wouldn't know whether the Republican Party will substantially change itself. It seemed as though last night Ted Cruz was rolling the dice, right? He was betting that Trump is not going to be elected, and that he is now setting the table for a 2020 run, one where he can say, I told you so, I told you not to buy into that, and look what happened. He's even dangled the notion that if Trump does win, he would run a primary in 2020. And I can see that happening, too. I could imagine a scenario where that happens. But I don't think anybody knows how the Republican Party will be reconstituted. I think it's less likely that it will be reconstituted in any of the ways that David would recognize from the past. It seemed as though even this time that the two forces vying for control of the Republican Party were Trumpism, whatever that is, and then a pretty hard-line Ted Cruz-style Ken Cuccinelli conservatism, one that's even harder on a lot of the social issues. And if there's a third plane of republicanism, it's probably kind of Paul Ryanism, which is a very, very hard line on fiscal issues, especially the reform of entitlements, the changing of Social Security and Medicare, none of which seems to be anywhere in Donald Trump's thinking. So I don't know. To me, those are the three elements of it. But if you're imagining a return to some kind of Jacob Javits, Nelson Rockefeller kind of party, I just don't think that's anywhere out there. Probably the closest thing to it was Jeb Bush this time around, and look what happened to him. Here's Ted in Hartford. Hi, Ted. You're on the air.
Hi. Sorry for the mixed hang-up before. I'm calling from Quogue, New York. It's a town in the Hamptons.
Okay.
And my question is kind of a question comment, is a throwback to the already buried Melania Trump plagiarism story. I'm a journalist, and I've been published in New York Magazine, El Decor, and I write a column for the Southampton Press out here. And it seems pretty darn clear to me that Melania Trump sourced these quotes herself, wrote them down from her speech, from Michelle Obama's speech, and then let other people take citrus in the wind and take the blame for it. And I think that...
You know what, Ted? I hate to interrupt you, but we got to go. We are just flat out of time here. But thanks very much for calling in. We'll be talking probably a little bit more about Melania tomorrow on The Nose, if we have time and if the story hasn't, as Ted just suggested, totally cooled off. Thanks to everybody who helped out today.